What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another video. And today we're going to take a look at CGC graded Star Wars comic books. Only Star Wars books. And I heard your complaints loud and clear that not all of us only collect CGC 9.8s. I get that. So I did put together some books ranging from CGC 9.4, 9.6, and 9.8. And I think as I go through this, I want to maybe explain why it makes sense to focus on certain grades. In some cases, I do think it makes sense to look at 9.4s and 9.6s. In some cases, when you're like me and you only collect 9.8s, you start to realize that the price premium that you got to pay for it, it doesn't make sense for most people. It's just the way I am. But in some cases, it does, I think, make sense to pay up for the 9.8 grade. And so as we go through some of these books, just keep that in mind. I'm going to try and give you my thoughts on that. But in general, not always, but in general, modern books only stick with 9.8s, in my opinion, because that's the only things that's going to be worth anything. There's just too many of them out there, and on the census, you know, if you look at them, in general, it just doesn't make sense to buy. If you're going to buy a graded book, don't bother with a 9.6, or definitely not with a 9.4. Most of the time with modern books. So let's go ahead and dig in. We're going to start with the vintage books. We've got a CGC 9.4 white pages for Star Wars #1. This one sold for $560. Now, the vintage Marvel run, I think, is where it does make sense for the big books, like the really, really big books like Star Wars 1, Star Wars 2, Star Wars 42, Star Wars 68. Some of those really big books, it makes sense to look at 9.4s and 9.6 because the price premium you got to pay is just ridiculous, right? But for a 9.4 grade white pages, and this one was a beautiful example, 560 was the winning bid on that one. When you jump up to a 9.6, there were several sales here recently. This one had white pages that sold for $900. That one just closed on September 10th, so that's kind of a good data point. And that's probably the sweet spot to me. I think if I'm going to spend this kind of money, going from $560 to $900, I think makes sense to make that jump, to go from a 9.4 to a 9.6. Premium to go from a 9.6 to a 9.8 for a Star Wars 1 is ridiculous. I mean, you're going to be paying 3.5 times to 4 times this price to get a 9.8. And while I did it, it doesn't make sense financially, really, if you don't have that kind of money or you don't want to save up that kind of money like I did. I mean, it took me like 3 months and a lot of sales to get to there. So I think for the most collectors, a 9.6 is more than sufficient, But I do think that the price premium going from a 9.4 at $560 to a 9.6 makes sense. It's when you go from a 9.6 to a 9.8 that price premium doesn't make sense for most collectors, myself included in that. Another 9.6, this one had an older style case. That one sold for $10.62 on the same day. That one had really nice clean edges. You really got to look at the centering and the colors. This one did have good for both, and that's why it sold for what it did, especially on the white Star Wars logo, that it doesn't have the red bleed through. It's worth paying up a little bit, I think, to go from to go for one that has a clean white Star Wars logo. Here was another 9.6. That one sold for $9.19 same day. So that gives you a rough price range, $900 to like $10.60 for a 9.6. Or if you don't want to spend that much, then go for the 9.4 white page. This is a beautiful example. Look how clean this one looks for a 9.4. Maybe, I mean, I don't see any kind of spot. This was a really good deal, in my opinion, for a 9.4. So something else is going on it. I mean, it had a little bit of wrap issue at the bottom, but for a 9.4, this one presents a lot nicer than a 9.4. So not everything's created equal, but that gives you some data points for all of those. Here was a 9.4 off-white to white for Star Wars #2. Now, in this case, I would probably lean towards a 9.6 again for the Star Wars #2. You're probably talking $500 to $600 for that one. That's the first full appearance of Chewbacca, Han Solo, and Obi-Wan. 9.4 though, off white to white, that one presents really well. That one sold for $225. That's a good bargain. Now to go to a 9.8, you're talking $2,500 to $2,800. You know, so that's 10 times this number, and it just doesn't make sense for most collectors. Here was a Star Wars 9.6. That one sold for $89 in an auction. So this is a sweet spot for a lot of these books. You know, it's not a first appearance book, but it's the final saga for the continuing adaptation of A New Hope. And then you go up to a 9.8. I didn't print it out, but a 9.8 is going to set you back $250 or so. So whether it makes sense to go from $90 for a 9.6 to $250 for a 9.8. Only you can decide that. But there are some good deals out there in the 9.6 range for the vintage books. This is another good deal. This was Star Wars number 35 in a newsstand for Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader's first face-to-face non-canon meeting. And there's not many of these on the census in a 9.8. So this is a good example of a book that it makes sense to get a 9.6, especially in a newsstand like this one, because this was kind of when they were transitioning over to direct editions, and direct editions are more common, or about, I think, a little more common than a newsstand. So a 9.6 for $63. I mean, you're basically talking case cost at that point. Luke and Darth Vader's first face-to-face non-canon appearance, and it's a great cover. I mean, I've got 2 of these in a 9.8, direct editions only, but it's just one of my favorite covers from the vintage run. Here's another 9.6 that makes sense. This is the first issue for the adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars number 39. And this one had a big overwrap, as you can see there. But this was a 9.6 with white pages. That one sold for $74 in an auction. A 9.8, you're going to be jumping all the way up to about 3.5 times that price. You're looking for an investment grade book. There are so many books in a 9.6 grade and a 9.8 grade for these that, to me, it makes sense to pony up a little bit for the 9.8, just to have the highest grade out there. But for a lot of people, maybe it doesn't make sense. And if it's just for your personal collection, you're not worried about what it's going to resell for after you kick the bucket, then get a 9.6 because it's a lot more affordable. Next up, we've got a 9.4 for the first appearance of Boba Fett and Yoda in comics, Star Wars 42. This one sold for $330. That's a good deal there. It had white pages. This 9.6 with white pages, it did have an overwrap there, but that one sold for $500. So this is a case where, again, I think that if you can, I would probably pony up the difference of $170 to go from a 9.4 to a 9.6, right? It's when you start jumping up to a 9.8, that's where the price really jumps. So another 9.6, this one was a newsstand edition, 9.6 for $500. So both of those were newsstand editions for $500. Now, to go up to a 9.8 for a newsstand Star Wars 42, you're probably talking $1,800 to $2,000 minimum. So this is a good case where I think a 9.6 for the newsstand is a sweet spot to aim for. But again, if you can't afford that, then get the direct edition in a 9.4. It's $330. But to me, a direct edition for $330 in a 9.4 versus a newsstand, which is much harder to find, in a 9.6, a higher grade, it's worth that $170 difference, right? Kind of weigh the pros and cons, but this is a case where getting the newsstand in a higher grade for only $170 more makes way more sense to me. Here was a 9.6 for Star Wars 43. This book is heating up just a little bit in a 9.8, especially because Lando, the Lando series sounds like it's in development. Donald Glover, I think his name is, the actor, he's writing it right now. So this book is heated up a little bit. This is the first appearance of Lando in comics. So the 9.6 in the direct edition sold for $125, and then here was a newsstand edition in a 9.8 that sold for $550. To me, I don't know if I'd pay $550 for this book right now. I mean, admittedly, it is a newsstand, but for a 9.8 in the direct edition, you're probably talking $330-ish. I think that makes sense. I go from a 9.6 for $125 in the direct edition to get the 9.8 in the direct edition for, let's call it $330-ish. That's where it makes sense. Now, do you want to pony up for the newsstand? It's an even bigger premium, right? It's another $210, and it doesn't make sense to do that. But there's quite fewer of these on the census because it's the newsstand edition. We're going to talk about Heir to the Empire, the first appearance of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Obviously, he's on everybody's mind. This was a 9.6 white pages. That one sold for $202, bargain. Here was a 9.8 though in the newsstand. Now, the newsstand, I think it makes sense to go for a 9.6 grade in the newsstand for Heir to the Empire #1, because in a 9.8 there's only like 80 of them or less that exist on the census, and you got to pay up for it. So this one sold for $1,502 and this one sold for $1,642. Both of those sold the same day, different sellers. So again, for a newsstand Heir to the Empire 1, I'd probably be okay with a 9.6 because there's only 80 of them in a 9.8. But for the direct edition, it's a judgment call on this one because you still have to pay a pretty significant premium to go from a 9.6 to a 9.8. For the direct edition, you're probably talking $700 or $800 minimum. So that's 4 times what a 9.6 goes for. So most people, I would say a 9.6 is sufficient. But In the newsstand, definitely. I mean, it's a huge premium for that. Next up, we've got Mace Windu, the one shot. This is a book that's flatlined and a really good time to buy it. This is the first appearance of Asajj Ventress in comics. Great cover from 2003. This one sold for $258. This one was hovering around $350 to $400. It got up to like $600 at one point. So if you want this book, now's a good time to do it. It's dead. And likewise, her origin book, which is Star Wars Republic number 60 in a 9.8, that one sold for $53. That's case cost. This was going for $120 just a month or two ago. So if you can get it for that cheap, grab it. That's a bargain in a 9.8 for origin, for the origin of Asajj Ventress. So $53. I wish I'd seen that. I would have bought that all day long. Here's another one in my collection, Star Wars Tales 23. This is the first cameo of Darth Revan and Malak. This is another book that's come down a little bit. This one sold for $198.50. This is the painted cover variant. This was going for like $225-ish. Now it's $200. So that's one I would focus on a 9.8 because it's pretty affordable in a 9.8. And you know, if anything happens with Darth Revan or Malak, you know, this is the one that's going to jump. It's not going to be the 9.6s. It's not like I don't sell books. You know, I had Wolverine 88, which was the first fight between Wolverine and Deadpool in comics, and I had two of those in a 9.8, and the prices got ridiculous. They got up to like $600 or $700, so I sold both of mine. I mean, I knew that book would come back down to earth, and which it has. So if the market is saying it's a $600 book, I don't think it's worth a $600 book. Then I do sell stuff occasionally. So that was a case where I did sell both of those after the news got announced that Hugh Jackman was coming back to play Wolverine in the Deadpool movie. Next up, Clone Wars #1. This was the direct edition. That one sold for $900 in a 9.6. This is another one where you probably want to consider a 9.6 because a 9.8 is going to be close to double that, $1,700, $1,800, somewhere in that ballpark. So a 9.6 is perfectly sufficient for that one, and I think it'll hold its value pretty well. Clone Wars #2 in a 9.6. This one sold for $125. To me, I think you pay up and get the 9.8 for this one just because it's not like a key issue. It's only the second appearance of Ahsoka. And to me, a 9.8 is probably the better way to go on that one for these secondary books. A 9.8 for Clone Wars #6. This one has also come way back down. This one was kind of going 200-ish. Now it's 160. That's a great cover there. So those are three really good Ahsoka-related books. Obviously, you want to get Clone Wars #1 first, but I would look at Clone Wars #2 in a 9.8, and then I would look at Clone Wars #6 in a 9.8 if you don't want to spend the money on a Clone Wars 1. Kanan the Last Padawan. This is another book that I would recommend only getting the 9.8. It's a modern book. It came out in 2015. This is the first appearance of the Rebels team in first full appearance. This 9.6 sold for $158, but this 9.8 sold for $320. To me, it makes so much sense to only get the 9.8 if you're going to get a graded copy of this book, because that price difference, that delta, doesn't make sense to get a 9.6 when there are so many of these on the census. I mean, there's hundreds of them. And it is an awesome book. I love the book. But, you know, to me, it just doesn't make any sense on some of these modern books. Darth Vader #3 is another example of that. This is a 9.6 that sold for $110 versus the 9.8 that sold for $230. I mean, you're only talking an extra $120 to get a 9.8, and there's thousands of these on the census. Now, where it does make sense for Darth Vader #3 to get a 9.6 is the 1 in 25, the Raqqa variant. You know, the 1 in 25, there's not many of those out there. I mean, there's a lot, but there's not nearly as many of those as this one. And I think for a 9.6 for that one, that makes sense to look at that one in a 9.6. But for the standard cover A, get the 9.8. It's only $120 more right now. And if Dr. Aphra makes an appearance either in this Ahsoka series or at some point later on, this is the one that's going to do well, just because there's 4,000 of them out there already. And then finally, here was a 9.6 for the third printing. This one sold for $143. A 9.8 will set you back $300 or so. So again, that's a judgment call for the third and fourth printing because they're so low printed. Anyway, I hope this helped. I just wanted to make sure to include some other grades other than a 9.8, since that was a request I've gotten lately with some of my market updates. So thanks as always for watching, and I'll be back soon.